My daughter called me on my 45th wedding anniversary to ask whether I'd decided what to do with the house. Not, "Happy anniversary, Mom." Not, "Are you doing okay?" Just, "Had I made a decision about Kay?" Just, I remember standing in the kitchen, holding the phone against my ear, looking out at the backyard where my husband Edwin had built a wooden pergola with his own hands the summer before he got sick. The wisteria was blooming. It does that every May, right on schedule, like it doesn't know that things have changed. I stood there looking at those purple clusters and I thought, she doesn't even remember what today is. "I haven't decided anything yet, Renee," I said. "Mom, I'm just asking. Mitchell and I need to plan. We have the kids' college funds to think about, and the market's been—" "Renee, what? Today is my anniversary." There was a pause. A short one, the kind that tells you everything. "Oh, right. I'm sorry, Mom. Happy anniversary." Then, before I could say another word, "So have you talked to a financial advisor yet?" I told her I had to go. I set the phone down on the counter, and I stood there for a long time, listening to the wisteria move in the wind through the window I'd cracked open. Edwin used to bring me coffee right about this time on anniversary mornings. He'd set it on the nightstand and sit on the edge of the bed and say, "Another year, Shirley. We made it another year." He'd been saying that since 1978. Even at the end, when he could barely sit up on his own, he still said it. His voice was different by then, thinner, a little far away, but he still said it. He passed 14 months before that phone call. I want to be honest about something. The grief had not gone the way I expected it to. People talk about grief like it's a storm, you weather it, and then it passes, and then the sky clears. Edwin's death didn't work that way for me. It settled in, it became the weather. I woke up with it and went to sleep with it, and somewhere in those 14 months I had quietly stopped expecting it to lift. I was managing. I was functional. I kept the house clean, and I went to my book club on Thursdays and I answered my emails. But there was a version of me that had gone somewhere I couldn't follow, and I wasn't sure I was going to get her back. What I hadn't expected was that the grief would be made worse by my own daughter. Let me tell you about Renee. She is my only child. I raised her in this house, the same house she was now asking about on my anniversary, and I loved her fiercely and sometimes imperfectly, the way mothers do. She was a bright girl, serious, always practical. She married a man named Mitchell Crane when she was 31, a man who managed money for a living and who had, in my experience, never once looked at anything without first calculating its value. He was not unkind. That's the thing that made it harder, actually. He wasn't cruel. He was just transactional. And somewhere along the way, Renee had started to see the world through his eyes. It had been happening gradually. I noticed it first in small things. The way she'd redirect conversations about my health toward conversations about my estate planning. The way she'd mention making sure everything is organized, more than she asked how I was sleeping. After Edwin died, those small things became bigger things. She came to help me sort through his belongings, which I appreciated, genuinely, but she also took that opportunity to take photographs of several pieces of furniture that she described as antique, and that I had always simply thought of as ours. She mentioned estate sales twice in the same afternoon. I let it go. I told myself she was grieving too, in her own way, and that not everyone processes loss the same way. But the anniversary phone call stayed with me. It stayed with me for days. I didn't sleep well that week. I'd lie awake in the bedroom. Edwin and I had shared for 41 years, and I'd look at the ceiling, and I'd think about the way her voice had sounded. Not unkind, never unkind, just businesslike. And I'd feel something I didn't have a clean word for. It wasn't quite anger. It was more like the feeling you get when you realize something has been true for a long time and you've just now allowed yourself to see it. My daughter had stopped seeing me as her mother. Somewhere, without my noticing, I had become an asset she was managing. About 3 weeks after the anniversary, I got a call from a man named Gerald Whitmore. He introduced himself as the private financial advisor Edwin had worked with for the last 6 years of his life. I had known, vaguely, that Edwin had financial arrangements I wasn't fully briefed on. He had always been the one who handled that side of things, and I had trusted him completely. But I hadn't known about Gerald Whitmore specifically. He was calling, he said, because Edwin had left instructions that he should contact me after I'd had a full year to grieve. He was very specific about the timing. Gerald told me. He said he didn't want you to have to think about this in the middle of the hard part. I sat down at the kitchen table. What is this about? Mrs. Novak, he said. Your husband's a separate investment account in 2017. He contributed to it consistently over the following years. He left it entirely in your name, with a letter of instruction addressed to you. I asked him to send the letter first, before any numbers. I just wanted to read what Edwin had written. It arrived as a scan in my email, and I printed it out because I wanted to hold it in my hands. His handwriting was there on the page, or a version of it, typed and signed, because his hands had started trembling by 2019, and I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and I read it 3 times. He said he had watched me give for 44 years. He said he had seen me put everyone else first so many times that he wasn't sure I remembered how to put myself first anymore. He said he was not writing to me as someone who was angry or bitter about our life. He loved our life. He said he loved every ordinary Tuesday of it, but he was writing to me because he wanted me to have something that was only mine, something that no one else had a claim on, something that I could use to do whatever I wanted, travel, take a class, renovate the kitchen the way I'd always said I wanted to, sit on a porch in Savannah and read for 3 months straight, and he wanted me to feel 0 guilt about any of it. You have spent your whole life making sure everyone around you had enough, he wrote. I want the last gift I give you to be permission to be a little selfish. You've more than earned it, Shirley. You've more than earned it. I put the letter down and I cried for a long time. The good kind, mostly. The kind that comes from feeling known. Then I called Gerald Whitmore back and asked him to tell me the numbers. It was more than I had imagined. Edwin had been careful and patient, and it turned out quite quietly clever with money in a way I had never fully appreciated. The account was substantial. Enough to fund a significant change in the way I was living if I chose to. I didn't tell Renee right away. I wasn't sure why, at first. I told myself it was because I was still processing it. But if I'm honest, something had shifted in me since that anniversary phone call, and I needed to think clearly before I said anything to her. I needed to figure out what I actually wanted, not what I was supposed to want, not what would be easiest, not what would keep the peace, but what I, Shirley Novak, 63 years old, widow, retired school librarian, wanted. That was harder than it sounds. I sat with it for a full month. What I discovered in that month was how much I had accumulated that I had never let myself have. Not things. Experiences. Desires I had filed away under someday, and once the kids are grown, and when things settle down, I had always wanted to see Portugal. Edwin had wanted to go to Portugal too, and we'd talked about it for years, and then his health had made travel difficult, and then impossible. I had always wanted to take a watercolor class, not for any reason, not to become anything, just because I liked the way watercolors looked, and I had never once in my adult life done something simply because I liked the way it looked. I had always wanted to rent a small house somewhere warm for a month. Not a vacation, but a stay, the kind where you learn where the good grocery store is, and you have a routine, and you're just living somewhere else for a while. I started with Portugal. I booked a 2-week trip through a travel agent downtown, a woman named Bet Callahan, who had a small office near the library where I used to work. She was patient and thorough, and she helped me plan something that felt both adventurous and manageable for someone traveling solo for the first time in over 4 decades. I paid in full up front from the account Edwin had left me. I did not feel guilty. That surprised me. I had expected to feel guilty, and I didn't. I also signed up for the watercolor class. It was held on Tuesday evenings at a community art center about 20 minutes from my house, taught by a retired art teacher named Florence Okafor, who had a no-nonsense manner and a gift for making beginners feel like they were capable of more than they thought. The first night, she told us that watercolor was an unforgiving medium, and that the sooner we stopped trying to control it, the better our work would get. I thought about that a lot on the drive home. I hadn't told Renee about any of this yet. She called me twice a week, usually on Tuesday and Friday evenings, and our conversations had a familiar shape to them. She'd ask how I was feeling, I'd say fine. She'd mention something about the house or my finances or whether I'd spoken to an estate attorney yet, and I'd deflect gently and we'd move on. I was not trying to be secretive. I was trying to figure out how to say what I needed to say. The conversation I'd been avoiding happened on a Friday evening in late June, about 8 weeks after Gerald Whitmore's call. Renee phoned at her usual time. We talked for a few minutes about the weather and about my granddaughter Piper, who was 9, and had just finished 3rd grade, and who was, according to Renee, going through a phase. Then Renee said, "Mitchell and I have been talking, Mom, and we really think it's time to sit down together with an attorney, just to get the paperwork in order. It doesn't have to be a big thing." I took a breath. "Renee, I need to tell you something, okay? I've been doing some things, with my finances, with my time." "I wanted you to know what kind of things." I told her about Gerald Whitmore. I told her about the account Edwin had set up. I told her about Portugal, and about the watercolor class, and about a few other things I'd been quietly putting in motion. A kitchen renovation I'd commissioned after all these years. A series of day trips I'd planned to places I'd always wanted to see and never made time for. I told her all of it in a calm, straightforward voice, because I had practiced saying it out loud to myself enough times that I could do it without my hands shaking. There was a long silence. "How much is in the account?" she finally asked. That was the first thing she asked. Not "That sounds wonderful, Mom." Not "Edwin did that for you." Not "How are you feeling about all of it?" Just, "How much is in the account?" "That's between me and my advisor," I said. "Mom, Renee, I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you because you're my daughter, and I thought you should know." Another silence. Then, "I just think you should be careful. You're not. You haven't been yourself since Dad died, and making big financial decisions when you're grieving. I made this trip to Portugal as someone who has finished grieving enough to know what I want," I said. "And what I want is to go to Portugal. This is exactly what Mitchell was worried about." I stopped. "What does that mean?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation I heard something I hadn't expected. Not defensiveness, but something closer to embarrassment. "He said he was worried you'd make emotional decisions before we had a chance to." She stopped. "Before you had a chance to what, Renee?" She didn't finish the sentence. I thought about Edwin's letter. I thought about 45 years of anniversaries. I thought about wisteria blooming on schedule, indifferent to loss. I thought about how I had spent my adult life being the kind of woman who put the needs of others first without even having to think about it, because that's what I'd been taught to do, because it came naturally, because I loved the people I was doing it for, and I thought about how that same quality turned inside out had made me invisible. "I need you to hear me," I said. "I love you. That has not changed, but I am 63 years old, and your father left me something specifically so that I could take care of myself, and I intend to honor what he wanted for me. My financial decisions are mine to make. My estate will be handled when the time comes and I will handle it thoughtfully. But I am not going to ask your permission to live my life." She cried a little. I hadn't expected that. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't realize how it had been coming across. She said Mitchell had been pushing her to be more. She used the word proactive, and that she hadn't stopped to think about how it must have felt from my side. I believed her. I also knew that believing her and trusting the change were two different things, and that only time would show me which one was warranted. Portugal was everything I had hoped for, and several things I hadn't known to hope for. I flew into Lisbon on a Tuesday morning in September, exhausted from the overnight flight and slightly overwhelmed by the airport. And then I took a taxi to a small hotel in the Alfama neighborhood that Bet Callahan had recommended. And I dropped my bags in my room and opened the window and looked out at the terracotta rooftops and the river beyond them. And I felt something I can only describe as arrival. Not just at a destination, at something. I walked for hours that first day. I ate a late lunch alone at a small restaurant on a steep street. Grilled fish, bread, a glass of local wine, and nobody talked to me and I didn't need anyone to, and it was one of the most peaceful meals of my life. I thought about Edwin constantly but not painfully. I thought about him the way you think about someone who loved you well. With gratitude, not with the hollow ache of absence. He was there in the pleasure I was taking in things. That was where he'd gone, I realized. Not away. Into the parts of me that knew how to enjoy being alive. I took a day trip to Sintra. I spent an afternoon in a tile shop learning how the azulejos were made. I went to a fado performance one evening and sat in the dark and listened to a young woman sing in a voice that made the air feel heavier and I thought about the Portuguese word saudade, which someone had explained to me as a longing for something you loved that is gone. And I thought, yes, that's a word I've needed. I came home different. I don't know how else to say it. I came home knowing things I hadn't known when I left. Not facts, but something less nameable. A sense of my own capacity, maybe. A reminder that the world was very large and that I was still in it, and still capable of being surprised by it. The watercolor class was still going on when I returned. Florence Okafor had been moving us from basic washes to more ambitious subjects, and I had been working on a painting of the view from my bedroom window, the backyard, the pergola Edwin built, the wisteria at the edge of the frame. See, it wasn't technically accomplished. The values were uneven, and I kept losing control of the edges. But something about it was true, and Florence had pointed at it one Tuesday evening and said, "This one has feeling. Don't touch it anymore. You'll ruin it." I framed it. It's hanging in the hallway now. Renee and I had dinner together in October, just the two of us, at a restaurant she chose. She was different, or she was trying to be, which I thought was worth something. She asked me about Portugal. Real questions, curious questions, not questions that were leading anywhere. And I showed her photographs on my phone, and she said, "Mom, you look so happy in all of these." She sounded surprised. I wasn't sure whether to be sad about that or not. Toward the end of dinner, she brought up the subject of the estate again, but differently this time. She said she'd been thinking about it, and she didn't want to be the kind of daughter who made me feel like I was being managed. She said she and Mitchell had talked, and they were going to step back and let me lead on all of it, on my timeline. I told her I appreciated that. I meant it. I also told her something I hadn't said out loud to anyone yet. I had been in conversation with Gerald Whitmore about restructuring things. Not in any dramatic or punitive way, but thoughtfully, in a way that reflected what I actually valued and who I actually wanted to provide for. I was setting aside a portion for a scholarship fund at the elementary school, where I'd worked for 12 years, in Edwin's name. He had always cared deeply about kids having access to books. It felt right. I was also setting up a small trust for Piper, Renee's daughter, my granddaughter, earmarked specifically for education and travel, to be available to her when she turned 25. Not because I don't trust you, I told Renee carefully, but because I want her to have something that's hers, something she knows her grandfather would have wanted her to have. Renee was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Piper is going to be so. She's going to love knowing that." Her voice caught a little. He adored her. I know he did. We sat with that for a minute. The restaurant was warm, and the food had been good, and my daughter was looking at me across the table like she was seeing me, and I thought, this is what I wanted. Not revenge, not to diminish anyone. Just this, to be seen. The kitchen renovation finished in November. I had wanted to redo the kitchen for 20 years and had always found a reason to wait. It was too expensive. It wasn't the right time. We'd do it eventually. The new counters are a pale gray stone, and the cabinets are painted a deep, quiet green that I found in a magazine years ago and cut out and kept in a drawer for exactly this hypothetical moment. The contractor, a man named Dale Purcell who had done work in the neighborhood before, told me it turned out better than he expected, which I took as a high compliment from someone who sees kitchens for a living. I cook in it every morning now. I make coffee and I stand at the window, and I look at the pergola and the wisteria, and I think about Edwin and his Tuesday mornings and his another year surely, and I feel not fixed, not healed in the clean, complete way people talk about, but present, moving, alive in a way I had stopped being for a while and had found my way back to. Last week, Piper spent Saturday with me. We painted together at the kitchen table. She wanted to use my watercolors, which I let her do, and she made a picture of a cat that she said was realistic and that bore no resemblance to any cat I have ever seen. And I told her it was wonderful, which I believed completely. She ate 2 bowls of soup for lunch and told me at length about a disagreement she'd had with her best friend and asked me what I thought she should do. I told her the truth, as I saw it, gently, and she nodded with the gravity of a 9-year-old taking counsel seriously. When Renee came to pick her up, Piper ran in from the backyard where she'd been looking at the wisteria. It doesn't bloom in November, but she'd been interested in the structure of it, the way the old vines had wound themselves around Edwin's wood. And she said, "Grandma, I want to come back next Saturday. Then you'll come back next Saturday, I said. Renee smiled at me over Piper's head, a real smile. The kind I remembered from when she was younger, before life got complicated and practical and full of things to manage. I smiled back. There is a version of this story that ends with bitterness, and I understand why people might expect that version. I was forgotten. I was treated like an item on a checklist. I watched the people around me see my grief as an inconvenience and my life as a logistics problem to be solved. Those things happened, and I am not pretending they didn't. But Edwin knew me better than anyone, and what Edwin wanted for me was not bitterness. He wanted me to remember what it felt like to want something just because I wanted it. He wanted me to take up a little space in my own life. He wanted me to go to Portugal. So I went, and I came home to purple wisteria and a green kitchen, and a granddaughter who wants to come back next Saturday, and I really do think, that this is what the rest of it is supposed to look like. I'm not waiting anymore. I'm here.